Very interesting topic, and this one is super hot. And all of a sudden, I would say in the last 2 years, everyone started talking about sovereignty and what sovereign AI actually means. So what it means is the nation's control over its future in this AI, uncertain future and destiny. And I like to start this slide with the famous quote from Doom: "Power of spice is power over all." And we are entering in the age where AI is becoming a tool, a weapon, basically an instrument to either manipulate things or to highlight the good things, to fight misinformation or to produce misinformation. So all of a sudden, AI sovereignty is becoming a hot topic that leads to basically not just a nice, tool to have, but economic survival. AI is becoming the backbone of the future economy for every nation and every state. Countries without AI will basically face the deficiencies and lack of growth, and it's gonna be slow but steady. 5-10 years from now, we're gonna see countries that neglected AI having major consequences as a result. The other aspect is cultural integrity. If you don't know this aspect of AI, I'm sorry to ring this, but AI is not neutral, and it will never be. AI is trained on data, and that data is biased. As Professor McGee said, these biases are creeping in. So we should care, and we should pay a much better attention to what these data sets are and what those big companies use to produce the systems that we use every day. I use ChatGPT every single day. How many of you guys use ChatGPT? Yeah, so it's pretty much, it became an everyday tool. And we're not thinking enough about what it is being trained on, right, and what kind of things are hiding in there. And because it's literally like trillions of words, there's no easy way to extract these things. So when you type things and test it and probe it towards specific things, you will actually have a hard time figuring out if there is something, wrong in that data, because it's such a compressed and such an efficient, robust system that it will take probably 1 million people probing it to be able to recognize it. So that brings us to national security. AI is crucial for modern defense, including drones, cybersecurity, military decision-making, and relying on foreign AI for national security could be catastrophic in times of conflict. And I promised Professor McGee to not introduce too much of my own bias by being Ukrainian, but you can imagine, how many of these aspects Ukraine has gone through already by being dependent on the foreign technology, foreign supply chains, and foreign elements of the defense, including intelligence. When you use the systems of record, systems of intelligence that are owned by the enemy, you basically lose by default. So that brings up a very, very important point of discussion into the challenges of developing sovereign AI, because it does require massive investment, coordination, and long-term vision for all of these things. And obviously it takes a lot of money to develop AI. That's why we hear about all of these crazy funding rounds these days. I'm sure you've seen like OpenAI raising gazillions of billions and trillions. That's no longer, surprising thing to people, I feel like. It's basically, it doesn't even feel like the money is even real. It's just a bunch of numbers that are being thrown into this giant system to produce AGI, as they call it. And as a result, this global demand is actually pushing us into facing the talent wars. It's really hard to hire talent right now because all of these big corporations and OpenAIs and Anthropics and others are absorbing all of that talent at unprecedented speed. And some of these researchers are paid astronomical sums of money. So if you're a government, competing for that talent may become unrealistic. So these are very interesting concerns that everyone should be aware of when they're designing the policies and trying to reinforce the right type of strategy, the long-term vision behind it. And of course, there is global competition. The same way we had the arms race, before Cold War and all of these things, we're facing AI race. And we see China competing with United States. We see India also keeping up the pace. We see, I would say, Russia competing on that from the perspective of their own interest in the current war, but they're definitely advancing. And we see even Iran doing things that are quite impressive in collaboration with China. So all of these things are very important when we discuss the policy, because once we discuss the policy, especially international policy, we have to keep in mind that some of these malicious actors actually don't care about our policies. There's nothing that will actually prevent them from using AI and drones and killing people with those. It's it's make-believe to think that we'll design the most efficient international regulation framework and they will just comply. So that's also a philosophical, but in a way practical subject to discuss when we think about these policies.
And Artur, if I could just jump in on this point, because this I think is such a key point and really fascinating for us to think about. Maybe pause here for a second and just discuss this a bit, right? So what Artur presented here is, while kind of Western democracies may lean into kind of the ethical use of AI, in a sense, restrict capabilities, restrict certain research based on a desire to respect certain rights. Balancing that in the strategic competition alongside certain nations that may not have those guardrails, may not have those concerns, and may in fact want to use this dual use capability for malicious purposes.
Sometimes even primary use.
Primary use for malicious purposes. So the question I want to pose to everybody for us to just take a couple minutes and just discuss is, should the United States, given this global strategic competitive environment that has security implications, also ensure that it's investing in a thorough understanding and capability to, in fact, match that potential risk, right? So whether or not we ever actually deploy that capability, should the United States, in fact, develop that capability with the potential understanding that certain adversarial nations might not only seek to develop it, but seek to deploy it in a kinetic, type of conflict environment. So just by a show of hands, like how many people, right, and our guests feel free to participate as well, but how many people think no, right? The risk is too severe, right? That this type of research could leak, could be stolen, and therefore we could in fact get this capability and this understanding could find its way into, let's say, violent extremist groups, global terrorist groups that don't necessarily have the capability or the expertise to develop it within their own knowledge base, but could use that type of illicitly acquired understanding to then deploy malicious attacks. Should the United States withhold that given that level of risk, or should the United States government, working with industry, in fact push the limits of AI, understanding that it will in fact define warfare in the near, mid, and distant future, and therefore it should be limitless in the way in which we think about this capability and how it might be deployed, and ensure that the US government and the US industry, in fact, has a thorough understanding and therefore could deploy it at any point. So who falls on the, we should, based on kind of the risk environment, restrain certain AI capabilities, certain research on AI capabilities, because the risk is just too high for this to get out of control? How many people see it that way? No? Okay, all right, so just tell me.
It's always
Aria,
me.
what do you
I'm
think?
so sorry. I think it really depends on the specific capability. So for example, I know there's a company, I believe it's called Shield AI, that built an AI system called HiveMind that can pilot, theoretically, an F-16.
Mhm.
That, I think, is something that investment in knowing what our adversaries are probably investing in the same thing is worth it, and something we should be pushing, because you can control a pilot, at least you theoretically can.
Mhm.
Versus creating something like the Russia had it in the claim they had a dead hand system for nuclear weapons, where it calculates probability based on potentially faulty intelligence. I don't think we should ever develop something like that, because not just ignoring the risk of someone else getting their hands on that technology for a minute, we've avoided nuclear war primarily because people looked at intelligence and went, that doesn't seem right. And until we have AI that can realistically exercise that kind of thinking and logic, which I don't think we'll have anytime soon, we should not be developing things that require that kind of thinking and logic.
Okay, all right, thanks. All right, who wants to take the other side of that coin before we pass it back to Arthur? Who says absolutely we should go, like, there should be no limits. We should have such a thorough understanding of what this capability could do, particularly and we're defining this, we're framing this in a wartime scenario, right? So this is not peacetime that we're talking about. Yes.
Yeah, I think that the United States should push the limits of what AI could do in terms of understanding, because we don't necessarily have a clear view of what our adversaries are doing. Right now in the United States, there's some regulation in terms of who can receive hardware. Particularly right now, China is restricted from some AI computation. There are some restrictions on Middle East countries as well. You know, based on past things that occurred. In the United States, AI is taking a new role, especially in warfare and in things they could do, as well as quantum, right? These are two new avenues that we are leading globally. And in terms of the hardware, we are the leaders. Nobody has achieved what the American technology has done. China hasn't, and with the restriction on the ASML machine, which does the lithography, the US and its allies have clearly made the necessary steps to kind of like implement that from the hardware level, right?
Right. So we're talking about chip technology, just so everybody's tracking, right? So we're talking about semiconductors and the supply chain, right? And how that, and I want to pass it back to Arthur, but I wanted to, because this is such a key point, this concept of dual use, understanding that some folks, some nation states, some actors will lean, as you said, towards a primary malicious use, and other actors, primarily Western democracies, that have a values-based system, right, will argue that, in fact, no, there should be certain restrictions. And so this concept, or what you're highlighting, is very important in terms of the supply chain as a longer arc for how we think about securing these technologies, right? Because it's not just the US government in isolation, but there are allies and partners. Well, since nobody, Mario tried to help me, but since nobody wants to argue the point, could you argue the point, Artur, on why maybe restrictions and guardrails are necessary? And I think you kind of highlighted it on your previous slide around like AI, the EU AI Act, but the risk is so immense, and we still don't fully understand it. So is that something you could also speak to?
I'm challenged by that question, because I was born and grew up as a pacifist. I was born when the Soviet Union collapsed, and I lived through my teenage years actually being delusional that the war will never happen in Ukraine. And then when 2014 happened, I had to readjust my mental model. And then in 2022, that was further readjusted to the extremes. So even though as a AI researcher, engineer in Silicon Valley, entrepreneur, I may see potential benefits of us stalling the actual progress in AI, unfortunately the world doesn't work like that. There is a harsh reality of what we call right now the axis of evil, the North Koreas of the world, actually teaming up to have a much further advancement in what they currently have, and we just can't risk that. So I can't actually vote for the further restrictions, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slides. So in terms of the collaboration versus isolation, we have to balance that tricky equilibrium between the independence and the global cooperation. Because sovereign AI doesn't necessarily mean complete isolation, because we as countries, the allies, can collaborate on potential shared challenges while maintaining control over the sensitive and critical technologies. And that's what we're seeing right now with the allies, and even Ukraine plays a big part in that, in terms of sharing the knowledge. A lot of US companies actually use Ukraine as the battlefield to test their technologies. And in a way that's kind of like, it sounds cynical, and I hate to say that in a way that my country is a playground for battlefield technology, but in a way that helps us in the long term to deter potential threats, because we'll learn. And basically the sheer velocity, the speed of the war there is insane. We haven't seen such modern warfare before. The new technologies are being deployed in like weeks. It's not months, it's not years. It's something that is absolutely dystopian. The new drone comes up and boom, it's already on the battlefield, and then China, with their crazy manufacturing capabilities, turns on the manufacturing for that in just 2 weeks. And then it's thousands of drones that get shipped to actually both sides. That is a crazy part of the current war dynamics. So we have to balance that independence with the collaboration for the strategic learnings, the lessons learned, and the shared components even for the actual sovereignty to exist. And in terms of international regulatory efforts, we talked about that briefly. We have to be mindful about what we're actually co-creating and aiming to be the golden standard of the regulation. And we do have to have control in critical areas, because we have to have strict control over certain pieces that are critical to our security and well-being. And that part touches on integrity of sovereign models. This is a new topic. This is the topic that I'm personally involved with by building models that represent different languages and cultures, because I've been fortunate to be born in another country, to move here, to actually travel a lot, and I saw how important the differences of perspectives are, even in Silicon Valley. The beauty of Silicon Valley is in the fact that so many people from different parts of the world come with different mindsets, different ways to problem solve, and that gives that actual advantage in problem solving. If we assume that in 50 years from now everyone will be speaking one language and think in the same way, I don't think innovation will actually exist as a result of that. That's why I'm so passionate about diversifying AI from just being English-centric to having the sovereign national type of AI models. So in terms of sovereignty and integrity of that sovereignty, there are key points that I wanted to discuss with you guys, and hopefully have a follow-up discussion on that, because I'm really enjoying the interventions, by the way, Professor McGee. One point is national values. The other one, cultural relevance and social norms. Also, ideological alignment and historical context, super important. Geopolitical perspectives in AI decision-making, the legal boundaries and the regulatory compliance, and ethical boundaries in AI development and deployment. So we'll go a little bit through these things, and I'll throw in some controversial things in here because that's how it is right now. I think it's absolutely delusional not to have conversations about these very sensitive topics that are happening in our society, sometimes divisive for a reason. So in terms of national values, I truly believe that sovereign AI must reflect and uphold the fundamental values of the nation, which ensures that AI systems make decisions and recommendations that actually align with the country's identity and aspirations. And AI systems should reinforce and promote national values and not the narratives that are external and potentially promoted by malicious actors to disrupt the actual consistency of national values, which will basically help maintain that cultural cohesion and national pride in an increasingly globalized world. We kind of in the past 20 years, we rushed so fast into this globalization phenomena that we actually haven't had time to adjust and develop coping mechanisms for that. And in a way, we live in this hyper-connected world where in 10 seconds you can connect with someone in the Middle East or someone in Japan. And it's absolutely magical, except we forget that the world is different everywhere around the world. And every nation has its own actually narrative about how to live their life. And I would argue, we should not enforce the way of living externally, but we should not also allow the external actors to influence the way we live, for example, here in America. So that's
a quick question on this one, because I didn't know you were going to set this up this way when I asked the question, but since everybody says we should go full force on this, right? One of the things that we know is that the Chinese government uses one of the ways in which they apply or test AI capabilities now is really leveraging the facial recognition, right, and the image recognition capabilities, and pair that with the large data sets to essentially build a profile on each and every citizen within that nation, right? And so if we're saying that, in fact, no, we should compete with our adversaries on every single front in which they're researching and leveraging this technology, then are we not also saying that we, right, should be actively exploring, right, this type of facial recognition database and profile building on every single U.S. citizen? Is that, are we saying that as well, since we should compete on every front?
I would say no. Again, I think there's a difference between knowing you have the capability to create something and actually deploying it. To create a facial recognition model where we can read someone's emotions, read different micro expressions, we can do that without building a profile of every single American citizen. I think there is a balance between the capability and the Patriot Act 5.0. I think that there is a line eventually between yes, we have the capability, we should in general, I think, push the boundary, but there is a line where, one, we're not any better than our adversaries, and two, we don't want anyone getting a hold of that information. A data set on every single American citizen, ignoring foreign actors for a minute. Look at the country right now. We've got, whether you're on either side of politics, each side is saying the other one's gonna profile American citizens, prevent them from leaving states, whatever the heck they're saying. I don't want anyone having that. I don't think it's a foreign actor thing. I think it's a domestic thing too. We're not stable enough for the government to have that information on American citizens.
So does anyone have any response to that? Because I have one thing that I want to throw out there. And please, let us know who you are, because I appreciate your comments.
So my name is Anton Alexander. I'm a generative AI specialist at Amazon Web Services.
Okay.
I'm with the WWSO team. We're underneath the executive at Amazon to basically evangelize generative AI. We deal with some of the largest customers in the world, Meta, NVIDIA, they're partners. Arthur's a good friend of mine. He's also with us at AWS. So I work on a lot of these projects you guys are talking about, especially these and the ones before.
Well, thank you for joining us. You had a comment.
Yeah, so NIST has a standard established for this, which is the face verification 1-to-1 and 1-to-many. It's measured. There is a standard, global standard that NIST has created. They have border pictures, visa pictures, and different pictures. So there is a framework already designed for this, right? And if you look at, like, you go through TSA or you go through Dubai Airport, right? They're gathering citizen data from across the world, right? You go in, you don't even need to see anybody. Literally, you put your face in front of the camera when you go to Dubai, Abu Dhabi airports, right? Facial recognition is a very advanced technology. Right now, it's at the point where it usually occurs from a feature extraction, where you extract the features from the person's face, and it's like, stored. I think really the question here is, how is the feature stored? Like, it's really the security on that, like, because you have your social security number, you have your credit card, you have all this data, right? There's policies around that, right? How that's stored, encryption, X, Y, Z. But what about your facial data? Then when the next thing comes out, like palm vein, which is more accurate. So is there a framework for biological data extracted from a person? We make this thing over faces, every American's face, blah, blah, blah. But what about other people grabbing their face? The faces are in. The government can use facial recognition. The NSA, they have this technology, right?
But here's what I'm probing on. So it's not simply the facial recognition. It's not simply the image, but it's pairing that data with the application for your mortgage, with because I imagine what you're really referencing when you talk about us going through secure spaces, airports and things like that, right? You may reference kind of some global security database, right? But is it also referencing and pulling in data from our economic labs, right? Like, has someone filed a bankruptcy, right? Has someone recently gone through a divorce, right? Really building an entire dossier, essentially, an entire profile on every single individual, right? And that information, that type of data doesn't necessarily have to be used, right, for some type of investigative or police or security activity. It could be used to market to you more effectively, to think about as and I don't want to get into the politics of the election here, but think about, like, are you likely to vote in a certain direction, a certain way? So that's what I'm getting at. I'm not aware of those data sets being combined and housed under any specific U.S. government entity, and I think the CCP is doing that.
Oh yeah.
So that's the distinction I'm drawing. Like, to say I'm going to scrape all of your collective data, and then I'm going to say, okay, well, Artur has founded dozens of businesses. What are some of the things that happened with those businesses, right? And then like how do I now pair that with data around his travel and the things, when he went to school in Ukraine and his first AI girlfriend, right? Like, how do I put all that together, right? And now I can say, okay, well, I can query that data, right? Just like ChatGPT, I can query what is the likelihood, based on this huge data set, that Artur is gonna stop by American University and lecture this class and then go with his good friends, right, to a restaurant in DC to have a good night, right? Like, I'm just saying that type of, because really what we're trying to get at, I would argue, is kind of this predictive analysis, right? What is the likelihood that X, will take Y action, and how can I influence X individual to maybe take Z action?
And I would argue that it's actually all about intent. And what currently I think is being missed in the overall AI, AGI, super intelligence conversation is that these machines have zero intent. The intent is always coming from a human being. And it's not about AI, being all of a sudden intelligent and destroying humanity. It's about who has control over that AI and who wants to destroy humanity. And this kind of the emergent capabilities is a whole group of people that think opposite, and they think, oh, AI will come up with intents and objectives, and the Clippy and all of these things, the Golem story from the Sorcerer's Apprentice, all of these things, they basically lack the understanding, the underlying understanding that these machines are prediction machines. That's what they're great at, actually, but they lack intent. So with that, I'll jump into the second slide, which is the cultural relevance and social norms. Because we, especially being such a multicultural and diverse society that America is, we need to design sovereign AI with a deep understanding to local customs, traditions, and social expectations of different groups of people, because that prevents the cultural misunderstandings and further ensures that AI interactions are appropriate and meaningful. And that actually, helps recognize and adapt to the cultural diversity that exists within a nation already, ensuring that all groups are respected and represented, which in a way should bridge the division. Right now, we see all of these algorithmic systems that are so great at division. You go on Twitter, every time I go on Twitter, I'm just like emotionally charged. The system is basically designed to evoke those emotions and create division. Like, I guarantee, there is basically the implicit design that goes into it that highlights all of these things for you to take the action, that create engagement. And as a result, it further divides us as a society. Why? Because it's actually hard to understand what some, random person in rural Kentucky thinks about. Like, the AI systems should bridge it, not divide it. So that's one of the key aspects of the sovereign AI, alongside with the ideological alignment and historical context. Another super sensitive, controversial topic is actually the fact that AI systems should be developed with understanding of the nation's historical experiences and interpretations, because this prevents AI from promoting conflicting or insensitive historical views, because the history happened. We can't just, forget about it or, discard it, but it's important to use AI tools to build the future and not further divide us on these sensitive topics. That's why, AI systems should align with countries' fundamental ideological principles, which are amazing principles as we, enjoy the freedoms and amazing way of living here in the Western world. And we should strive to preserve them and grow them, not be influenced by another ideology that may be creeping in without even our awareness of these things, which gets me to the next point, the geopolitical perspectives in AI decision making. One of the fascinating recent research papers has been the one developed, done by the Anthropic, a commercial entity, a big AI startup. And they've done a paper called Sleeper Agent. And basically it's about, in simple words, you can embed certain things into these AI models that you can't override. Basically, it's almost like those, if you guys have seen the TV shows, Americans or others, where there are sleeper agents that are, Soviet spies that live through like decades of pretending to be Americans. And then when the moment comes, they activate and they do some malicious act. And it's possible to do that with AI models. And it's very scary because we actually have no mechanisms and no systems, no evaluations or benchmarks to even detect these things. And who knows if these things are already within the ChatGPTs of the world that we use every single day. And moreover, once these systems are used for decision making for some critical infrastructure projects or infrastructure decisions in a moment of crisis, this may become a very, very sensitive topic when the crisis comes. And also another aspect is legal boundaries and regulatory compliance. And once again, I take the kind of like an extreme case here where in Emirates, it's actually illegal to impersonate someone online. You can go to jail for creating a fake profile of someone. And these are the nuances that exist around the world. And US also has some intricate laws, state by state, that AI systems should be aware of, and we should be aware of these in terms of actually operating within those frameworks and making sure that the sovereign AI, as it evolves, supports the development of new laws and regulations, because that addresses the emerging technological challenges that we're facing as a society. And of course, ethical boundaries. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was this crazy story about the suicide capsule in Switzerland, where there's an active investigation and multiple arrests happening. And this is basically because it's completely legal to do this in Switzerland, but it was a US citizen. So taking this extreme example, you can extrapolate how in the future AI has to reflect certain cultural, religious, and philosophical perspectives in combination with these legal frameworks and boundaries. Because if it doesn't, even in the healthcare, certain decisions, critical decisions, will be influenced by systems that are designed by external parties or external nations. And it's absolutely critical for us to design the right kind of system that fits our own narrative. Which brings me to the we, the people, in the age of AI. Basically, what can we do to keep in mind best interests of the nation and its people? It's empowering citizens in the AI era, so we should ensure that AI serves collective interest of nation citizens and not just corporates, because once again, if you throw in the use cases of combining the data for mortgage applications and all these things, it's very easy to extrapolate to the corporate dystopia, as I call it, where we take all the worst from the CCP, and bring it to the American capitalism, and all of a sudden, it knows our every single step and gives us the insurance quotes based on that. Not the future that I want to live in. And that's why we need to democratize the oversight of AI development. Basically, we need to form the foundation for this democratic governance so that citizens should have a voice in shaping the direction and application of these national AI strategies. But for that, they need to be educated. And of course, we need to preserve individual rights in the digital age. This is where all the privacy laws and corresponding frameworks come in. This is where we need to foster the national unity through technology that we talked about. And we need to have that citizen participation in AI governance. We have to create somehow, because this is not created already, this doesn't exist, the mechanism for public input on AI policies and development. Previously, in the previous age of Web 2.0 that I lived through, with Wikipedia being kind of like the golden standard of the collective participation, we had this amazing phenomena where, best way to put the right thing on the internet was to put the wrong thing. And people would come and actually correct it. And that's how Wikipedia gained momentum, because so many people were passionate about correcting things that it became sort of a source of truth. Right now, we're lacking that mechanism for AI development. What you can do is basically do the thumbs up and thumbs down on ChatGPTs, but there's no way for you to actually say, hey, this is misrepresenting my history or my culture of my people, or maybe there's something fundamentally inaccurate here. There is no feedback loop, the right type of citizen involvement loop, and we need to think more about that. And of course, we need AI literacy as almost a civic duty. We have to encourage the widespread understanding of AI, because that influences how we interact with AI. Of course, we need to balance national interest with the global cooperation that we talked about. We need to foster clarity through the benchmarks and evaluations. What I mentioned previously about lack of these systems to evaluate potential threats, we need to develop clear, nationally relevant benchmarks and evaluation criteria for these AI systems, which ensures the transparency, accountability, actually allows organizations and public to assess the performance and impact of these sovereign AI systems, because basically that sets the expectations. Right now we have 0 of those. And that brings me to my last slide, which is right into the topic of how we should regulate AI. We kind of had 30 slides talking about it in general, and here's my bias. Because my bias, I don't believe in restriction specifically. And that's why, you know, my bias being Ukrainian and all of that gets here and gets amplified. Because I truly believe in the environment where the speed of innovation is so fast that it's impossible to restrict it. If you restrict it, you kill it, essentially. But there's another way, which I call enablement. So instead of having voluntary things or mandatory things, you can have the actual infrastructure to enable some of these things to happen organically. And what I talk about is basically things like AI Innovation Grants Program, something that every startup founder in Silicon Valley knows about when they're looking for funding. Right now, I guarantee, like if you survey 100 people out of the Silicon Valley founders, 0 will tell you that they're thinking about government grants. Why? Because that has never been a thing in the past 20 years, but it should be. It should be almost like a first thing that the Silicon Valley founder thinks about, like how to get the first 20K or 50K in. Oh, there's this AI grants program. If we do necessary things and comply, we'll get essentially the first round of funding. There should be AI for Good challenge grants. So challenging the use cases of AI, not just for the corporate dystopia and the insurance applications, but for something that gets underfunded. Right now in Silicon Valley, there's a very big focus on becoming billionaires and all that good stuff. And I played that game for a while. Now we run these AI for Good conferences and events, and it's absolutely amazing how many people come to these. People want to create these AI for Good applications for inclusive, diverse type of applications that actually don't have enough of the capitalization potential. There's not enough revenue to justify these things, but there could be government support to do these type of projects. There should be subsidized AI safety certification program, something that government encourages instead of restricts. There should be subsidized responsible AI advisory services, something that gets people like Anton involved in advising companies, and something that should be sponsored by the government and the national initiatives. There should be compute access program. It's absolutely basically impossible to get compute right now. As a nonprofit, as a researcher, I've tried to do some of these things through my 501c3. It's really hard. Unless you're a commercial vehicle with a strong capitalization potential, you won't get any free compute because it's so scarce. The GPU scarcity is real, and government can have an impact on that to enable more compute for universities, for nonprofits, for individual researchers to do these research programs.
So not everyone here is kind of standing on a strong technical foundation. Can you unpack, and maybe in layman's terms, compute and what that actually means practically for a company like yours? What are you actually doing, and what does that mean, and why maybe is that cost so high?
I'll give you a really interesting project. So for example, one of the projects that we want to do is to actually build LLM that speaks Navajo language. And as you can imagine, there is 0 commercial potential in such project. But there's a huge humanitarian aspect. Same as, for example, we want to do a project to build an LLM for Yanomami tribe in Brazil, the Amazonian tribe that holds some unique knowledge about medicinal plants and healthcare that is basically absent from our current mainstream healthcare. For us to do that type of project, we need GPUs, the chips to run AI. And these things are super expensive. To run a project like that, you probably need like $50K, from $50 to $100K. And it's really hard to secure that if you're just running as a nonprofit. So having more of these initiatives funded by government or funded through universities in abundance of compute is absolutely mission critical. The other aspect is tax incentives for responsible AI development. sounds simple, but should be done. There should be more public-private AI safety partnerships. More universities should be involved and being funded by the government and national agencies. There should be more of the AI safety research type of work, and even accelerators. We have this amazing model in Silicon Valley of incubators and accelerators. Why not have that, but from the government perspective of a very important topic? So, to wrap it up, I ended with the phrase that we need more ARPANETs and human genome projects. Both are super famous projects. ARPANET is the project that basically internet was born from. And Human Genome Project is one of those, public-private initiatives where U.S. government funded this project. So we need more of those, and maybe less of the closed AIs. So with that, I'll wrap it up, and thank you. Let's talk. You can follow me on LinkedIn. This is actually a link to my super long article about the importance of LLMs from a national perspective. And yeah, I would love to have dynamic conversation. Professor McGee suggested to do a round of quick introductions.
Yeah. So one, let's thank Artur for that great briefing